Fox News alert, President Trump is doubling down yet again on his criticism of the special counsel investigation. He says it's now been discredited after a newly released FBI document reveals information the agency used to justify surveillance of a former Trump campaign aide during the 2016 presidential campaign. And on we go. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, host of the Evening Edit on the Fox Business Network. Elizabeth McDonald, don't miss it. Democrat strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov. And joining us in the center seat, Fox News media analyst, host of Media Buzz, and author of Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth. Howie Kurtz is outnumbered. Nice to see you. You're silent.
Oh, is this where I come in?
He has good manners.
I had to fill the vacuum.
Wow. And we're the media.
It's so good to be outnumbered.
Thanks. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
All right, let's get to the news. It is the document that so many have been waiting for after House Republicans tried for months to secure its release. The FBI has released the application it submitted to a secret court, the FISA court, to get permission to start surveilling the Trump campaign aide, Carter Page. The heavily redacted document, we now know, reveals the infamous Trump dossier compiled by a former British spy, Christopher Steele, which was a central part of the FBI effort. President Trump tweeted this. So now we find out that it was indeed the unverified and fake dirty dossier that was paid for by crooked Hillary Clinton and the DNC that was knowingly and falsely submitted to FISA, and which was responsible for starting the totally conflicted and discredited Mueller witch hunt. Exclamation point. House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte also slammed the FBI's use of that dossier to obtain the warrant. Watch it.
We certainly learned that there is a serious problem with the FBI presenting to the FISA court an application for a search warrant against a United States citizen, and then followed by 3 renewals when they were basing it on a very flawed document, the so-called Steele dossier that has never been verified. Even after all of this came out, they attempted to verify it and failed.
Flip sides, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, firing back, saying the documents bolster arguments that the FBI and legitimate concerns about Page's activities and ties to Russia.
No, those applications set out in some detail, a lot of which unfortunately is redacted, just why the FBI was so concerned that Carter Page might be acting as an agent of a foreign power. And let's remember that application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words in a letter I think you asked him about, in which Carter Page acknowledged being an informal advisor to the Kremlin.
And now, for the first time, we are seeing the letter Republicans on the House Intel Committee sent to the White House last month, calling on President Trump to declassify and make public key parts of the Carter Page FISA application, saying, quote, the committee's investigative findings include DOJ's and FBI's use of an unverified dossier of memoranda that was not subjected to proper U.S. government verification and was not handled according to FBI procedures because DOJ and FBI continued to obstruct the committee's investigation. It is time to put the facts in the public domain. Howard Kurtz, is it time?
I think there is a huge partisan fight over this document that is a little down in the weeds for a lot of average people. And the reason, if we looked at this document now, there's so many redactions, it looks like a chunk of Swiss cheese. But here's what we've learned. We've learned that this warrant was approved by 4 Republican-appointed judges. We learned the FBI believed that Carter Page was targeted for recruitment by the Russians. He said yesterday on CNN he was an informal advisor to the Kremlin. I'm not sure I see the distinction. And we learned that the FBI did tell this special court that the person who didn't name her, or DNC, had paid for this dossier, was trying to injure Trump's campaign. So it wasn't like it went unnoticed.
So to answer my question in transparency, you call it down in the weeds, but what does the public need to know at this point? Because if it's so heavily redacted, what are we learning? Well,
we're learning that both sides will take the same pieces of paper and argue about it. I'd love to see the whole thing, but there are national security concerns, and that's why so much of this has been cut out, which makes it hard to reach a definitive conclusion.
Jessica, you know, from the Democrats' point of view on this, you may have heard Trey Gowdy say that if there were evidence of any kind, of certain kinds, then that Adam Schiff would have leaked it by now. But are we so down in the, as Howard is suggesting, so down in the political weeds that there's not much substance there for the American public to grab onto?
I think there are top-line findings, which is what Howie laid out there, that are incredibly important for the American public to see. I think with the redactions, the difficulty becomes, for instance, if you take, the fact that the Republicans were arguing that the Steele dossier was the sole basis for the FISA warrant. It's clear from the redactions that it was not.
Said that once.
Oh, the main base.
Nobody ever said that once.
Well,
let's just say that it was part of it, and
Chairman
it was a big part of it.
even said in his interview.
That way we don't have to say all. Let's get the superlatives out of it.
Either way, when there are redactions after that, that complicates things. So it would be good to see what else there were. When we talk about Michael Isikoff's reporting, for instance, for Yahoo, which has now been exposed that it wasn't about circular reporting, but rather to quote Carter Page in 2016 when he declined to verify a story that he was in Moscow at a certain time. Those are things that we should have more information about, but the national security reasons are paramount.
Can we just talk about Carter Page for just a moment?
Yes, please.
Yes, there's been a lot of there's been a lot of pushback from the White House and others saying that his role, if any, was very small. He calls himself an informal.
I love that. That always means I'm hanging around the fringes and no one has asked me to be here and no one's paying me and I'm just an informal advisor here. I have no real role. Carter Page, I mean, it was best said that he's more Inspector Gadget than Jason Bourne. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to him talk and you watch these interviews that he's doing, he doesn't have a lot of credibility. I mean, he seems like he's kind of all over the place.
Seems to like being on TV, though.
Seems to like being on TV. I can understand why if he has a meeting with anyone, it would raise suspicion. At the same time, he's been on the radar for a really long time. And the fact that he's hanging around the hoop at the Trump campaign as well, I don't know. I mean, I would dispute some of Jessica's facts in the idea that, so the FISA warrant, it mentions in every single place this dossier, which we know was paid for by the opponent and didn't prove out to be true. And those Yahoo stories were circulated by the same people that created the dossier. So it seems like if they didn't need the dossier, it wouldn't be listed everywhere over and
it was
over
unverified,
again.
right? So that's the issue too. And I'm afraid, Harris, we're going to get into these hyper-technical terms that'll bog the debate down. I mean, let me back up. Senator Marco Rubio, to Melissa's point, has said Carter Page was on the radar screen for a long time before the Trump campaign. And he was sort of hanging around as a consultant with the shingle hanging out. But the senator also said this doesn't mean there was spying on the campaign. There certainly was unmasking of Trump campaign officials, the names in intel sources by all sorts of Obama-era officials. I think your question is a good one. Do we need to learn more? Should the American people see more? Should we be more transparent?
I want to jump in with a couple of things if we can, and I'll come right back to you, Elizabeth. So the president tweeted today, so President Obama knew about Russia before the election. Why didn't he do something about it? I don't know if we can stick this. There it is up on the screen. Why didn't he tell our campaign? Because it is all a big hoax. That's why. And he thought crooked Hillary was going to win.
Well, it's unclear. I mean, the term hoax is problematic in light of what intelligence is already saying about Russian meddling in the campaign. Should we wait for Mueller's report? Let him finish it? Yes. Is it unreasonable to say it's a witch hunt? Likely, yes. I mean, because was there evidence of collusion? We don't see that right now. Should we let the Mueller probe play out? Yes. I don't know how long it's going to take. That's a problem, I think, for a lot of people.
Former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Andrew McCarthy from Fox earlier. Watch this.
The big problems that I think people are going to have with this is that there's a lot of things in national security where the government has to be able to look you in the eye and say, trust us. FISA is exactly that, because you never get disclosure of it. And what people are going to wonder is if they did that in this case, how rampant is the problem? How much do they push the envelope because they know no one's ever going to check their work?
All right, so irrespective of party, that's an excellent question because, it's always been the secret court. So if we begin to even peel, even with redactions, a bit of that process back, should we then naturally be curious, has this happened before? Have there been things that have been used to get warrants before that this court has looked at that we might want to dig deeper into and make sure it was
And it's hard
what
to
it
judge
should be.
because it has been so surrounded by secrecy, and at the same time, we want to know if this was outrageous or not, but unanimously for judges. I was really struck yesterday by Trey Gowdy, Republican congressman, saying top Trump national security officials should resign, because it's been, liberal pundits have been saying that, John Bolton should resign, and Mike Pompeo should resign.
And why should they resign?
And Ivanka should resign as his daughter, because the idea is that if you don't like Donald Trump's national security policies, even his handling of the Mueller investigation or his handling of Vladimir Putin, you should resign as a matter of conscience. The fact is, the people who work for him, when they may disagree at points, are trying to push him and the government in a good direction. I think it's kind of a cheap shot.
I want to bring
Should
it back
the
to the
American
FISA
public
warrant.
then resign just real quickly? Because if you look at the polling, they're supportive of the president. I mean, that the polling numbers
Not
likely
on
the
the
policy
Putin
is.
issue, though.
Well, even during the Helsinki summit, before and after, they were still supportive of his
And his approval numbers are bumping up.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
I think we're going to get to that in a bit, but come back to the FISA warrant and all the redactions that are on there. I think people keep saying, why doesn't the president just release it in full? We have seen in the past that when we take these redactions off, that lately they've been embarrassing to the top echelon of the FBI. I actually think the president is trolling all the Democrats, and that the longer this FISA thing goes on, and then that the more suspicious, most people, especially on his side, get of this process. And in the end, when you peel it back and you see those embarrassing things, it's
an aha moment.
I'm not-
Right? Real quickly, let's get to Sarah Sanders, press secretary, on this very issue.
The president would like this to operate independent of him, but he certainly has asked for the Department of Justice to be transparent in this process. And if there are questions, which clearly there remain to be some, we hope that they'll step up and help answer those questions.
All right, Elizabeth?
Your point's well taken that this FISA court, stepping back and looking at it, is extra constitutional. I mean, do we want this as a precedent-setting place to go if you want to find out what's going on in your opponent's political campaigns? That's how the American people, in many respects, see
Isn't it a
But they
check and
do.
balance to have to go to judges and not just be able to?
Secret judges, I don't know. It just feels
They do
so
a lot
not
more than
transparent.
just warrants for campaign spying. on other
Understood,
campaigns.
but it can be used for that.
Yeah,
That's
but there
what this
are
shows
really
out.
two issues here, and I know that if Kennedy were here, she would be super into the other side of this, because we talk about Mueller all the time, but, in terms of the invasion of privacy of Americans and what our government can do in terms of spying on them without cause, it appears now, since the Carter Page FISA warrant was renewed 3 or 4 times, that there was good cause, and he himself has bragged about being
circular logic.
informal.
It's the same documents that are used again and again.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you didn't find problem with it the first time.
But that doesn't mean that Carter Page's contacts with the Russians stopped. That doesn't mean that Carter Page stopped talking to those people or bragging about the fact that he was a, quote, informal advisor to the Kremlin versus a formal advisor.
I want to step in with just a quick question to you, Howard, because you were the first to bring up the 4 GOP-appointed court judges. And I assume you brought that up because we were talking about separating the political shaft from everything else. So how does that play?
Well, I think if it had been mostly Democratic appointees, it would be a talking point for President Trump and his allies to say, see, this is the deep state and that sort of thing. The fact that these are judges happen to be appointed by previous Republican presidents suggests to me that they're not just, I guess there's a question.
They could be never Trumpers. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that matters one way or the other. We're talking about a secret
Well, hopefully they're judges who take this super secret stuff so seriously that they don't let partisan politics enter into it in deciding the very awesome power of using government surveillance against someone like Carter Page. I just think he's a bad poster boy because he did have contacts with the Russians, and of course the Bureau was suspicious.
It's more telling that they rubber stamp everything that comes their way, the secret court. I mean, the percentage of times that they approve these warrants is, 99%? I mean, that's what's telling. It's not political.
But it definitely,
were
it's
there
definitely
any
important
others?
with 12 angry Democrats that the president rants about all the time.
13, actually.
Sorry, 13 angry Democrats, and, that Judge Curiel can't even be unbiased, for instance, because of party affiliation.
But the overarching
heritage
question, Jessica, I think we can look at is, were there other instances like this where political bias from one side or the other allowed for FISA application to be rubber stamped, as you said, most of the time? I mean, that's when one side weaponizes a process against another side, it doesn't matter which side is doing that. We need to know.
No, we absolutely do, but I don't see how this was the weaponization of the FISA court process here. If it were 4 judges, and Judge Roberts has been stacking the FISA court, which is with his prerogative.
The escalating war of words as President Trump puts Iran on notice. Threaten the U.S. and face historic consequences. Why this may signify a big shift in U.S. policy, we'll see. Plus, progressive heroes Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, progressive heroes or socialists, say their agenda is now the Democratic mainstream. And that draws a warning shot from some moderate Democrats. Stay close.
Fox News alert: President Trump responding to some harsh words from Tehran after Iranian President Hassan Rouhani told Iranian diplomats that Americans, quote, must understand that war with Iran is the mother of all wars. And this.
You cannot mobilize the Iranian nation against Iran's security. You are making a mistake. You have clearly shown your opposition against the Iranian nation. Do not play with the lion's tail, or else you will regret it. It will bring you eternal regret.
So speaking of the lion's tail, the president tweeting to Rouhani in all caps, never ever threaten the United States again, or you will suffer consequences the likes of which few throughout history have ever suffered before. We are no longer a country that will stand for your demented words of violence and death. Be cautious. The president's late-night tweet followed a blistering speech Sunday night by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at the Reagan Presidential Library, where he compared Iran's regime to the mafia and announced that the Trump administration has launched a maximum pressure campaign targeting the Iranian government. And speaking on Fox and Friends, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders saying the president is not afraid to match tough talk with action.
And he's certainly not going to tolerate the leader of Iran making threats against Americans, making threats against this country, making threats against Israel. This is a president who is going to stand up and make sure he is doing what is necessary. He's showing peace through strength. But if needed and steps are required, this president is not afraid to take them.
So, Howie, once again, I think it's easy to read this president. He immediately flips the script. Whatever it was that President Obama did before him, he's going to do the opposite. President Obama coddled Iran, gave them the deal, that sort of thing, and was very eloquent and not, heated in his rhetoric. So the president immediately blasting right back at Iran. What's your take?
President breaking out the all caps and very rough language and reminiscent of the Fire and Fury and Little Rocket Man tweets against North Korea before they decided to sit down. But here's the thing. Everything gets reduced to knee-jerk politics in today's world. So already there was a CNN show say, well, is the president doing this so that he can overshadow the Putin press conference or even the Michael Cohen tapes? No, this was a very carefully considered. This is not an impulsive tweet, as we see from Mike Pompeo giving the speech talking about hypocritical holy men in Iran. They have decided to ratchet up the pressure, and Twitter is one weapon that the president uses.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because what the Iranian leader just said, he was making like the U.S. administration, the American people are against the nation of Iran. No, it's against certain members of the Iranian regime that publicly flog teenagers, that, execute people for all sorts of crimes that many other nations would not do. Human rights abuses. The problem here, Melissa and gang, is about oil, right? Because Iran has now threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. A big chunk of the nearly 30% of oil supply. It's a money play. But watch this. The Middle East, to get around that problem, 3 countries, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Iraq, have built pipelines to get around Iran threatening to shut the Strait of Hormuz, where a lot of oil is transported.
Well, real quickly, just, the next step in all of this, when you look at it, experts are saying, well, it might be more sanctions. So I get the money move because they know it's coming. There's no way to separate them out from Syria.
That's an important point. Iran's economy is in a state of collapse. The currency has been cut in half since the beginning of the year, it's estimated. And this is the opportunity that was missed years ago, where there have been protests because there's hyperinflation, which always leads to a collapse of a regime.
Politically, we want to try to separate them out of Syria, right? And you can't. They've made a huge investment militarily and monetarily, and they're not going to separate out. So to force their hand, you'd slap on potentially more sanctions, and they are near cripple right now with that.
I'm sorry, India, South Korea, Japan is now cutting back buying Iran oil. The president's wanting more of that.
So, Jessica, if you look beyond the rhetoric to the actions, and I heard General Jack Keane talk about this morning. President Trump comes into office. Iran immediately fires missiles. President Trump responds with huge sanctions, goes to Saudi Arabia, says we are going to stand shoulder to shoulder with Sunni Arabs. Let's form a Middle Eastern NATO. He kills the Iran deal, and then he sets up new sanctions that are supposed to go into effect in the next 80 and 190 days. That's tough.
It is absolutely tough, and I think that the net result out of all this is that we've got to see what the next step in the Iran deal is. I mean, all these countries that were a part of it have got to get together and figure out what a deal that is satisfactory for this administration that can continue to put force on them so they don't end up with a nuclear weapon. That's where we are at this point. I agree with Howie. I mean, the caps lock, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but based on what Mike Pompeo was saying yesterday, we knew that we would hear from the president on the Iranian front again, and this is similar rhetoric that we've heard, out of North Korea.
I don't know that the next step is getting together with the Iranian deal and seeing what we can do with that. It sounds like that's been ripped up and tossed into the wind.
Well, we need a new plan. The plan is not going to be to let them just exist in a vacuum, and maybe they...
Oh, no, we're going to sanction the heck out of them.
No, but we do, as Western democracies, we do need to be on the same page about what's going on here, because every other country that supported us in the Iranian deal is still supportive of it. It's not as if France and Germany and the UK decided that they changed their minds. No, and so we do need a new plan.
But that's what the 80 and the 190 days are about, is those are the new sanctions that are going to go into effect against those who are doing business with Iran. So it's not about
bottom line, they should stop threatening us, is what the president just said. And I think, Howie, real quickly, that this is a president whom they know will carry out what he says, at least to some degree.
Yeah, which one of the reasons Iran at least claims it is still living up to the terms of a deal that the U.S. has just withdrawn from. For people who don't like this, this is what President Trump campaigned on. Tough talk against Iran, getting out of the deal, and so he has a mandate on this. It's not like he suddenly devised this policy once he got into office.
Yeah, all right. Police have not ruled out terrorism after a gunman fired a barrage of bullets on a busy Toronto street, killing at least 2 people. A live report on the ground in Toronto is next. Plus, new fallout in Washington over President Trump's summit with Vladimir Putin, what members of his own party are saying, and what it could mean for the president's offer of a second summit at the White House.
The president either needs to rely on the people that he has chosen to advise him, or those advisors need to reevaluate whether or not they can serve in this administration.
Fox News alert, 2 people are dead following a shooting on the streets of Toronto last night. Now we're learning one of those victims was just 10 years old, a little girl. Video capturing the sounds of gunshots as a suspect walked past restaurants in the city's Greektown district and fired into them. Police say the mass shooting also left 12 people injured. Authorities are not ruling out terrorism. Watch as one witness describes the chaotic scene.
I thought it was fireworks at first, because it was a rapid fire, and then there'd be a pause and some more fire. We didn't know what it was. We saw people starting to run in our direction, and I still didn't know what it was, and then more people were running, and so we started running, and we ran down a side street.
Let's go to Toronto now. Brian Yanis, live near the scene. Brian?
Hi, Harris. Well, this is very much an active crime scene here in Danforth. This is the Greektown here in Toronto, about 15 to 20 minutes outside of the city center. And this is what we know. Just before, or just at about 10 p.m. last night, a gunman dressed in all black, 29 years old, wearing a black hat, holding a black satchel and a handgun, began firing away, shooting his bullets inside at storefronts, inside restaurants, outside on the patios, and also at a nearby park. Just to give people an idea, this Greek town is filled with tons of authentic Greek restaurants and bars, a very lively area, especially last night. And this is what we're now hearing from police. The gunman is dead. We do not yet know how this gunman died, whether or not he killed himself or whether or not police killed him in a shootout. We also now know more about the victims. 2 people are dead, including a 18-year-old woman and a 10-year-old little girl. There are 13 other victims. They range in age from 10 to 59. They are all being treated at local hospitals. Their injuries and their wounds are anywhere from serious to even critical in some cases. A local hospital that was treating 5 victims says 3 needed immediate life-saving surgeries. Again, we're also talking about the Toronto Mayor, John Tory. He says this isn't related to gang violence. There still is yet no motive as to why they think this gunman did this. We also do not have a name, but he says this isn't gun violence, and it could still be. Anything's on the table, including terrorism. This is the second attack in this city in 3 months. This is just 3 months after the April 23rd van attack that killed 10 people. Listen to what the mayor said earlier this morning.
This is a tragedy, another tragedy in our city this year. I promise all of the people of Toronto, but most importantly those directly affected by this tragedy, that we will all be relentless in getting answers about why this senseless attack happened.
Harris, the witness accounts that are being told in local media here at the Toronto Star and the Toronto Sun are really just horrific. We're told that witnesses say they saw 2 women laying on the ground, and bystanders were having to put chest compressions to try to save their life. Another person who was at a nearby restaurant, well, they got a bullet wound in their hand. They just walked out to see what the loud pops were. They thought it was fireworks. And then there was a moment where there was a dad and other people who were inside a popular park here on Danforth Avenue. They saw the gunman just shooting at people at the intersection. One woman was running, she tripped, and this guy saw this gunman horrifically shoot this woman point blank range when she was on the ground. An absolutely horrific attack last night. Motive still unclear, name of the gunman still unclear, but unfortunately there are 2 dead at this hour, an 18-year-old and a 10-year-old girl. Harris.
Brian Nanis live for us from Toronto there. Thank you, Brian.
New fallout over President Trump's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki 1 week ago today. As lawmakers continue to weigh in, the president has since invited Putin to Washington this fall. Now House Oversight Chairman Trey Gowdy saying Trump administration's officials should consider quitting if the president won't listen to their advice on Russia. Watch.
The president has access to every bit of evidence, even more than those of us on House Intel, and Will and I serve on Intel. He has access to Pompeo and Chris Wray and Dan Coates and Nikki Haley. The evidence is overwhelming. It can be proven beyond any evidentiary burden that Russia is not our friend and they tried to attack us in 2016. So the president either needs to rely on the people that he has chosen to advise him, or those advisors need to reevaluate whether or not they can serve in this administration. But the disconnect cannot continue.
Meantime, a new Washington Post ABC News poll shows 50% disapprove of President Trump's performance during the Putin summit and 33% approve. Howie, this is a mess. I mean, how does it just continue on and on and on? Put a button on it, move on.
Well, Helsinki press conference did hurt President Trump,
Without
including
question.
with many conservatives, but not with Republicans. When you drill down, you see that he still has that rock-solid support. So every media freak out, well, this is the controversy that's going to sink him, often turns out not to be the case. Now, on Trey Gowdy saying people should resign, part of that is fueled by, there was an interview, live interview last week from Aspen with Dan Coates, the Director of National Intelligence, who didn't even know, was told on the air that the president had invited Putin to Washington this fall. And people saying, well, he's not even keeping them in the loop. You know what? They're all staff. There was one person whose name was at the top of the ballot. His name was Donald J. Trump. If they truly feel like they can't get anything done, they have the option of leaving, but none of them seem to be doing that.
So why is it the answer to get people to quit their jobs in the middle of something? I mean, it's been hard enough for this administration to fill the positions. I mean, they've needed some Democrats in confirmation situations to be able to get that done. So you've got high-level people in those positions. We saw back with the travel ban. The president isn't likely going to loop in everybody when he's ready to move. That is his style. He told us that was going to be his style. I don't, it may not be within everybody's comfort zone, but the answer is to quit? I don't understand that.
Well, it's in part because of a concern about leaks. You tell 3 people in Washington, next thing you know, it's on the AP wire.
Good point.
But, it's a political maneuver. It's like they can't kind of scratch the presidential Teflon. So it's like, well, the people around him should just quit. They shouldn't put up with this because he's not listening.
And you think that will change his behavior, I guess is my question.
Absolutely not. There's been
That's his leadership
there's
style.
been a lot of turnover in this White House, and he, if anything, compared to last year, is doubling down on doing what he thinks is best, even if staff disagree.
Jessica?
I think that there's a difference between looping in and taking advice. And Trey Gowdy was talking there about actually taking the advice. Like, you've gone out of your way to stock your administration with the best people that are available to you. So you have people who certainly know what they're talking about in John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. I have a very different worldview than them, but I wouldn't dispute the fact that they know what they're talking about. And I think the frustration for those Republicans who are not cool with the approach to Russia and certainly were upset by the Helsinki press conference, but probably much more than that that's gone on, is that he doesn't even take the advice on board and makes a decision on his own. Like, I want Vladimir Putin to come before the midterms. No Republican, and I should also know Trey Gowdy's name isn't on the ballot again come November. It's very different. I don't know what he would be saying if he was running for re-election.
Flake. I mean,
a lot of the people who are speaking out are getting very bold now that they're going home to write a book.
Tom Bossert, former Homeland Security advisor to President Trump, made an important point that he's seeing, evidently, that the Russians are reporting back to their people agreements that may run counter to U.S. policy. So I hear your point. We don't want the good guys in the administration just to quit to make a statement. We probably need them there.
But they should be used for their skills.
Understood.
Okay. Yeah.
Democrats divided over the direction of their party, with more mainstream members pushing back against a revolt from the far left. How this could impact the party ahead of the midterms, that's next.
People believe that health care is a right. People believe we should raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and we have got to fight for an America that works for all of us, not just the 1%.
2 years ago, we were both in St. Mary's Park in the South Bronx. I was in the crowd. To be here 2 years later, pushing that revolution in Kansas is pretty amazing.
That was former candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, and his former protege, New York congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as they hit the trail in Kansas. They were campaigning for a like-minded House candidate there. Meanwhile, in Ohio, a group of moderate Democrats organized a first-of-its-kind convention to talk about pushing back against the energy and momentum of the socialist tide inside their party. Former Delaware Governor Jack Markell sounded the alarm for Democrats, reportedly saying, quote, "The only narrative that has been articulated in the Democrat Party over the past 2 years is one from the left. Frankly, it would have been better to start the conversation earlier," end quote. Well, it's been going on for a while. Hillary Clinton saw that left flank just reach up and grab her. So this isn't exactly new. But where is the Democrat Party going before November? Because this is a hot mess.
Well, the Democrats have a legitimate problem, the mainstream Democrats, and that is all the energy is in the progressive left. It's pushing the party to the left, and you win elections in the middle. But there's a media dimension to this. Media have made this 28-year-old woman who won one low-turnout primary in Queens and the Bronx, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, into the face of the party. She gets so much publicity. She goes out with Bernie. There are front-page stories. If this was a Republican who came out of nowhere and started making the mistakes that she was making, the press would be all over her. But she's getting a pass.
You mean not knowing Middle East politics to
not
the
knowing
point
the
of
first
just
thing
the
about
basics?
Israel occupying Palestine. Oh, I don't really know much about foreign policy. Let's occupy the airports until we shut ICE down. She is going off in her own direction, and to the extent that anybody identifies that with people who are trying to win races in swing states or red states, that is a bad look for the Dems.
I disagree, because I think that this feels very Trumpy to me. I mean, it's become a cult of personality in politics. He made a ton of mistakes, obviously, and overcame them because people who supported him felt like they knew where he was coming from and liked the personality, liked the energy, that he was totally different.
She's not a national candidate, and she's saddling everybody else.
See, I think the Democrats are better off leaning into somebody who has some spark to them. And that could be Bernie Sanders.
But her ideas, like guaranteed jobs or guaranteed income, have collapsed economies. Finland pulled the plug on guaranteed income. Let me back up. It is stunning that the Democrats have let socialism go full career in their party.
Well, they tried to stop it.
Right, it used to be that McGovern and Mondale were hard left. I mean, Ted Kennedy and Schumer voted for the 86 tax cuts. It's really stunning that this is going on.
Set it straight, Jessica.
I don't think that this has gone as far as the media is hyping this up. And yes, progressive candidates have done well, or Democrat socialist candidates. But if you look at the portion of them, I think it's only 6. And at the end of the day, Democrats are running local elections, which is why they're doing so well. I mean, we saw that certainly in Virginia, New Jersey.
There are 42 socialist candidates
on the ballot.
20 states and federal, state, and local
on the
levels.
ballot.
In
but
20 states.
anyone can run. I mean,
fact checking. Sorry.
Well, on the ballot, that's fine, but I mean, Republicans, there's a guy who's running who is like a Nazi. So I don't think we want to be talking about just who's showing up on the ballot. We're talking about who's actually winning. Well, anyway, the point is that meeting in Ohio took place because there is a fissure within the party, not necessarily because of numbers, but because of influence. And Bernie Sanders has a massive influence because of the social network that he has built.
Can I just step in for 1 second, though? When Bernie Sanders had the mantle, you had Wasserman Schultz over at the DNC working against him. And, you know, it cost her position, but you had opposition already within your party to his socialist bent. It was a problem then. It remains a problem now. What will you do about it?
Well, I think that people will continue to run local elections. Yes, the party has been shifted.
But they're running her out all over the country.
They are running her out all over the country, and it's detrimental. And she's also putting up false facts even about her own election, saying that she won all demographics, but she didn't do well with African American voters.
Hold on 1 second, because I heard you say earlier, Joe Crowley, could he step back into this race in New York?
Well, he can. I mean, not that anyone listens to Joe Lieberman.
He's still on the ballot.
He's still on the ballot. I mean, her race was 26,000 people. She did badly with African American voters, which is exactly what happened to Bernie Sanders. Hillary won by 4 million votes. She overwhelmingly won black voters. And Bernie Sanders and the progressive left does not do well with them, and they are widely understood to be the most informed voters in the Democrat Party as well. And she says she won them all, and she didn't.
Ooh, all right. Sounds like a fight to me, but I just see them. President Trump may be at war with the mainstream media, but his poll numbers keep going up. Howie Kurtz is here to talk about this. I can't wait, especially among his base, where it is at near historic levels. Howie, on it. Stay with us.
President Trump getting into it with the media again, tweeting this morning, when you hear the fake news talking negatively about my meeting with President Putin and all that I gave up, remember I gave up nothing. We merely talked about future benefits for both countries. We also got along very well, which is a good thing, except for the corrupt media. This, as a new Wall Street Journal NBC News poll shows, the president's job approval rising to 45%, the highest of his presidency in this poll. Approval among Republicans is 88%. That is the second highest rating for a president, just behind George W. Bush's support following the 9/11 attacks. Our own Howie Kurtz has a new piece out with analysis of President Trump's popularity and his relationship with the media. Take it away. What's your take?
You know, it's like an epilogue to media madness. And in 2017, there was an angry relationship between the two sides. Now I would say it's open disdain and disgust, corrupt media, and the press. Mainstream commentators talking about he's a racist, he's a traitor, he's engaged in treason over Putin. You look at the way the stories go. Early in the year, it was the leaked reference to S-hole countries. The media says this is it for Trump. Then just the last few weeks, picks a fight with NATO leaders, Justin Trudeau. Well, this is blowing up the Western alliance. Then the Putin press conference, the family separation policy, where media pressure actually did persuade the president to change his mind. And now the Michael Cohen tapes. The news cycle moves so quickly that each time the press is committed, this is the time that everybody out there is going to see what we see, which is a president who can't do his job. And still, Republicans in particular, not only support this guy, but they support him more when they perceive him to be under unfair attack by the press.
Yeah, it's as if some in the mainstream media are waiting to have their Oprah aha moment. No, seriously.
Yeah.
It really, and maybe that aha moment could be, we've gathered these facts, look at them as a public, we're going to give you this information, you see what you see.
Some of the criticism is legitimate, but it is the over-the-top attacks when you throw out words like traitor and treason and racism.
It's not necessary, and it's not professional.
Not necessary, and it's not persuasive, and if anything, it takes that part of the country that already does not trust the media and happens to like or at least be open to this president, and it just turns them off.
Howard, are you more worried than ever that we have gotten into a position where there's some in the media that are more powerful than the message?
I wouldn't go that far because, you know, President Trump won despite the pretty unified opposition of the media. I do worry for both sides. I really fear that the credibility of the press, which was under attack for 2 decades, has been further tarnished in the Trump era. And I think the president's been hurt by any effort to expand his base because he is under constant assault as being unfit.
You wonder if he would have a 70% approval rating if it weren't for his tweets, right? That people debate.
At the same time, he does play to his base.
Here's the other issue, too. We're going into the midterms, where we could see 4%, some economists say 5% GDP growth. What will get the voter up off the couch in the midterms? Will it be these stories, or will they see, hey, these economic growth policies, they're helping us?
Yeah.
You know, that's going to be,
issues.
what's the issue, right, for them?
Issues.
I think it's important to pay attention to a rising personal popularity for Donald Trump and what's going on with the generic ballot. So there was a while where Democrats were at 13 to 15% up when you looked at Cook Political Report polling, for instance, and then it sunk down after the tax cuts came out to only a 2 to 3 point edge, and you're right in the margin of error there. So that's a toss-up about retaking the House, and we need 23 seats. But currently, it's 10 plus again. So, and I think most analysts on both sides agree, and if you look through history, cyclically speaking, Democrats should take the House back. So I think we could have a situation during the midterms where the president remains at around 40 to 45%, wherever it is, and that Democrats do take back the House, and then watching him govern over divided government, where he's already had so many issues, will be an interesting plot line.
Here's why the Democrats may not take back the House. If you continue to let these socialists go full career in that party, the American people in the heartland will say, wait a second, these policies have failed. The economic growth policies of this president, forgive me, the economic policies of this president make those ideas totally irrelevant.
Okay, or tax cuts 2.0, that could decide it too. Yeah. More Outnumbered in just a moment.